pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have a word of welcome from the mayor's office. Bryan Goodman, he will be having a talk for us. The mayor's out of town. So, Bryan.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me to be here today. It is a privilege to participate in such an important service. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to say that? It is a privilege to be here. Those words just roll right off the tongue and sound so nice. You probably hear words like that from men behind podiums all the time. I remember when my oldest daughter, Evelyn, was about 2. Her favorite snack during the day was lightly buttered bread. But we had to make sure the butter was visible on the bread, or she didn't believe it had been buttered. She began referring to this snack as bread with not the butter melted. In her mind, that was the best wording to ensure her order was filled properly. And because it was so darn cute, we didn't correct her. It made us smile and appreciate her time each time she asked for her favorite snack. In time, the phrase became one word: bread with not the butter melted. It became common jargon around our home. We began saying our new word without even really thinking about what it meant. Eventually, we didn't even chuckle anymore when she placed her snack order. That dreaded process of regularity had done its work in us. It became a part of our family culture, and we became numb to the silliness of it. It was just a term for a specific type of snack, no longer a reason to smile or to appreciate our silly little girl. Every now and then, though, we'd say it outside the home or in the presence of a guest. Offering bread with not the butter melted to someone who had not the benefit of being numbed already to the strange term brought light very suddenly and quickly how silly the wording was. There's a very particular raising of the eyebrow and cocking of the head that can easily say, "Have you lost your mind?" when properly implemented by a friend. Those moments were a true blessing because they recalled the meaning of the words and the delightful silliness of it. Even thinking of it now makes me smile, and I can see that baby girl with her pigtails and her grin, asking for her favorite snack. What a blessing it can be to go back to that moment and remember. To remember. It's such a blessing to really, truly remember. Our blessings in this country are so plentiful that we become numb to them and speak of them and even enjoy them without remembering their origin and the price paid to protect them and preserve them. Today I offer the words, "It is a privilege to be here." And I say them not as that most common introductory phrase so often offered out of habit. It is a privilege to be here on this ground that we the people own and can gather freely on. It is a privilege to be here, to exist as a people who live on and who have a future to plan for. It is a privilege to be here, an honor and a choice and not a compulsion. Veterans Day is an opportunity we each of us have to be reminded of the very blessings we enjoy in such plentiful supply. This is the day our warriors, our heroes, our soldiers can look each of us in the eye with that same raised eyebrow that calls us immediately back to our roots and say, remember. We remember the price of freedom. We remember the defenders of freedom. We remember the author of freedom. We remember the threat to freedom that persists and those who bravely stand today to defy that threat. And we stand united with them with a firm reliance upon that divine promise of 2 Corinthians 3:17. Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And it is in that spirit of remembrance that I offer thanks to our veterans and a very warm welcome and a commitment to remember. Thank you and happy Veterans Day.
Thank you, Brian. Right now we're going to, since it's such a pretty day out, we're going to have a patriotic melody from the Rochester HS Band. It's going to be led by Dave Howells. Thank you very much. It was very good. Right now, we're going to have Senator Randy Head. I'd like to welcome him and thank him for doing this for us. Mr. Senator Head.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. It is indeed a great day to be an American. And when I see all of you gathered here, I'm reminded what a fantastic community this is. Today, my job was a tough one. I think my mission today is to try to take what all of you would say to our veterans and express that to them concisely and sincerely with the depth of meaning that all of you would have as we try to thank them for their incredible sacrifices. Every time I do this, I have three main obstacles. The first one is that I am not a veteran. I did not fight. I was not in combat. I've tried to understand it. I've read about every book I can get my hand on. I've watched every documentary. I've traveled the battlefields and studied them, and still I cannot ever fully understand what our veterans have gone through, despite how hard I try. Secondly is a limitation of language. We're here today to say thank you. When we go through the grocery store line and get our change from the clerk, we also say thank you. They're the same words. But today they have a much different meaning. It is deeper and richer and so much more meaningful. And I've looked for words in our language to try to express it, and I cannot find the right ones. Lastly, my third obstacle is that every time I try to talk about the sacrifices our veterans and their families have made, I get overcome with emotion. I have trouble getting through it. But I'm going to try to express what all of you would say to any veteran you could talk to say thank you in a way that is meaningful, and to try to approximate how grateful we are for the freedoms that we have because of the sacrifices that they made. And in order to do that, I'm going to talk about a couple of friends of mine and end up with a short history of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. This year marks the 50th anniversary of our involvement in the Vietnam conflict. I want to focus on that conflict for a little bit. The first friend I want to tell you about is a friend of mine named Penny Bannon. She lives not far from here, and she's not a veteran, but her husband was. Like many young men of that time, sent overseas to Vietnam. The first obstacle I mentioned, the fact that I cannot understand what our veterans have done, was made very clear to me a few years ago when I was asked to speak to an assembly at Logansport High School. I talked about the different wars, what it was like in the Civil War and World War II and Korea and Vietnam, and tried to explain to the children a little bit about what our veterans have gone through. And then I handed the mic to Penny Bannon. She didn't talk about what she'd read in books, she talked about what she'd lived when her husband was sent to Vietnam, watching the news every night and wondering if he was okay, seeing the protesters saying time and again that what her husband and other Americans were doing was wrong, even though she knew in her heart that it wasn't true. What stuck in my mind the most was she talked about a time that the Army gave her husband 6 days leave in Hawaii. They flew her and family members of other veterans there to spend that time with their soldier. How valuable those 6 days were, how meaningful it was to them that their sons, their husbands, their brothers had been pulled out of combat for a short time to see their loved ones during their tour. Of course, those 6 days went too quickly, and when they were over, the soldiers had to go back to combat, back to danger, and their families had to come back home. And when that plane took back off to head back to the mainland, it was filled with the sobs and wails. Of family members who knew they may have seen their loved ones for the last time. And far too many of them were right. The sacrifice our veterans and their families have made are immeasurable. And we are able to stand here today at the time and place of our choosing, without fear of government interference, to say what we wish, how we wish, all day, every day, because of those sacrifices. I think one of the best things I may ever have done as your senator was to organize a speech by Vietnam veterans to our college interns in the legislature. It had been done for years, but the senator who fought in Vietnam retired. And so last year, the privilege fell to me. And I asked Senator Boots from Crawfordsville and Representative Baird from Greencastle to talk to college students about what it was like in Vietnam. Representative Baird's speech was very eloquent, not necessarily because of what he said, but because of what he did. The man has one arm. He lost the other one in Vietnam. He was in charge of a group of soldiers, and their job was to guard a convoy that traveled the same path repeatedly. Try to imagine that. In the combat zone, the enemy knew exactly where it was, when the trucks would be leaving, and exactly where to be to set up an ambush. There were too many rules for our combat troops in Vietnam, and Representative Baird told me that when they wandered into an ambush and were fired upon, his orders were to call headquarters and ask for permission to return fire. Can you imagine? I can't. I've tried and I can't. He lost his arm in one of those ambushes, but went and did his job every day, leading his men the best that anyone could to fight for the freedom of people they would never meet. Vietnam was full of soldiers like that, full of them. If you talk to any young man who lived at that time, they all know their draft number. They all know what it means if it was low or if it was high, whether they were drafted or not. They remember that number. Another friend of mine, family of a veteran, at Christmas, he got out his medals and started explaining things to the grandkids. And his wife said, "Put those away, they don't want to hear about that." And I want to say before I leave that that's not true. We do want to hear. We need to hear. We depend on you to tell us. One thing I've noticed is always true, that if an American soldier was in combat, it's usually very, very difficult for them to talk about their experiences. But soldiers, I say to you now, if you don't tell us, we won't know. And I know that it's incredibly hard, and I say again, I cannot understand how hard it is. But talk to your children, talk to your grandchildren, tell us something about your experiences and what you did. And if you don't, when you're gone, those stories are gone too, and they need to be preserved. They deserve to be preserved. I had another Vietnam soldier tell me just last week that the military flew him home after his tour was over. And after that, after he reached California, he was put on a civilian airliner, and he had to wear his uniform in order to fly home at no cost. And he was spit upon in the airport at St. Louis on his way back here. Many soldiers had that same experience. I've told you before from this very spot, on behalf of those people, I apologize to you veterans that had to endure that. It is hard for me to understand that in our country, something like that would happen. But I'm here today to say that we honor you, we recognize you from every conflict, from every branch of service, from every circumstance, for what you've done and what you were willing to do. And to those families who have lost loved ones, similarly, your sacrifice is immeasurable. And those of us who have not been through it cannot understand. All we can do is say thank you, thank you, thank you. This spring I had the honor to travel to Washington, D.C. and was able to go to Arlington National Cemetery. And what better place to try to tally the cost of our freedom? I walked for hours until my feet hurt. If you go, you're going to find out that for us, Arlington National Cemetery is actually free. Ironically, there's no charge for us to get in. Those who are there permanently have paid the ultimate price and given all. While there, I was able to witness the changing of the guard, an attempt to honor every soldier and all of the fallen. America was not the first to create the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, but after World War I, we decided that it would be appropriate. And the powers that be wanted that soldier to remain anonymous for all time for two reasons. One, so that every family could think that maybe their soldier had been brought home. And second, to honor all of the fallen. They gathered 4 candidates and 4 alternates and placed them in identical coffins that had been cleaned for the occasion. They then brought them all to a small town in France, where they took every copy of their files and burned them on the spot. People from that town came to say thank you to America for the incredible sacrifice that we had made on their behalf. They then rearranged the bodies so that no one could tell which cemetery each candidate had come from. The next day, a Frenchman who had lost his son in World War I came with a bouquet of white roses and gave them to an American sergeant who had been wounded twice, once in each of our major offensives. They cleared the room and had that sergeant go in alone and place those white roses on the casket that he chose. And that man was the first unknown soldier. They then rearranged the bodies a second time to be sure that that body could never be identified. And they brought him home, where he was laid to rest at Arlington in the Tomb of the Unknown on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. Known then as Armistice Day, today, Veterans Day. And he rests there still under that bouquet of white roses. We are all gathered here today because we honor our veterans, because we recognize what they have done and the incredible value that is brought to this country, to our lives, and to the world. Today, thank a veteran. Every day, thank a veteran. If you fought, if you served, if you are a family member of anyone who did, words simply cannot express the price you paid and what we owe. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Okay, you guys want to all join and with the national anthem? The band is going to play. The honor guard will render the three-volley salute, followed by taps by the Rochester Band. Thank you to everybody. There's one more announcement in closing. A meal will be served from 4 o'clock till 6 o'clock this evening at the American Legion. And we do have chili now if anybody's hungry now. And I was told that the VFW does too. So everybody is welcome. All right, that concludes the program. Thank you, everybody.